Well, anyway, we're also keeping an eye on shares of Ford after the company reported a net loss for the third quarter. Company cited supplier costs and parts shortages as headwinds during the quarter. Joining us now to dive further into these results. Big week for some of these earnings. Yahoo Finance's own Pras Subramanian continues to join us for the automaker's earnings. All right, so break down Ford for us here. What particularly stuck out to you?
You know, strong quarter from a revenue point of view. They did really well there. They warned about those costs that were rising, and they sort of hit that higher adjusted EBIT range for the quarter. But I think the big thing that the big headline was right before the earnings came out, TechCrunch had a report about how they are shutting down Argo AI. So we heard more about that. They are very kind of concerned that level 4 is not going to happen anytime soon, like beyond a 5-year horizon. So they basically just took that $2.7 billion loss, that non-cash loss. I'm going to absorb some of those engineers. I think VW, their partner, will do that too. So I was a little surprised about how that just came out of nowhere, really. We had no warning about that. So that was a little strange. But altogether, they had a good, strong quarter in terms of they sold, I think their sales were up 16% versus a year ago. So that's doing pretty well. High transaction prices here, $54,000 per car, which is nice for them. But how sustainable is that going forward? So some question marks there. Good quarter, but not as good as GM's, in my opinion.
And that Argo decision by Ford, really, it's a huge story. It is essentially Ford, one of the most, if not the most storied automaker, essentially saying, we don't believe that cars are going to drive by themselves in the next decade. Because if they did believe that, they would be investing aggressively. But now it has trickle-down, I would say, effects. Pras, you have that Cruise division over at General Motors. You have a company like Luminar that's working on LiDAR. I mean, what does this mean for the industry at large? Well,
it makes you question how bullish GM is on Cruise, right? Are they having the same problems that Argo was having? Are they kind of powering through those issues? I mean, they're saying it's like the greatest challenge of our time is full autonomy. And it sounds like that is a true challenge, like even harder getting someone on the moon, right? So I think that's what we're seeing, the reality of that right now. We're seeing that as investment money kind of contracts a bit, they're not willing to put more into Argo AI, and Argo couldn't raise new funds for continuing on in that venture.
I mean, it sounds like that they will absorb some of the workers from Argo AI. Reportedly, there are about 2,000 people who work there, and some of them are going to come work at Ford and maybe at Volkswagen, too, which is its partner in the project. I was struck when I saw this news. We talked to Brian Selesky, who founded Argo AI and still was running it last May of 2021. And what was really striking to me at the time is that you get a lot of these self-driving people who really have grand plans. And even at that time, he was managing expectations in what felt like a more rational way. He said, you're not going to see, this is not a use case for everyone. In other words, you're not going to have everybody in self-driving cars. It's for very specific use cases. And maybe Ford wanted it to be for everything, for everyone, for every car. I don't know.
Well, even a couple months ago, Argo was talking about how they were expanding to certain areas like geo kind of fencing their service in certain cities and saying, hey, this is the way you kind of roll it out, take our time, go in areas we can control. But it seems like Ford's saying, you know what, we're going to pull back, put those resources towards level 2, level 3, and maybe go from there.
And Pras, real quick, this wasn't Jim Farley's initiative. This was put in place by former CEO Jim Hackett. So from his perspective, it's not his pet project. If for him, just take that money, to your point, and invest in other areas of the business that he has spearheaded.
Yeah, and Jim is really kind of spearheading a lot of the cost cutting now. Really wants to. I mean, we'd heard he's going to trim a lot of the fat there, so that might be part of this situation. Why Argo is now no longer kind of going to be on its own. So I think they're trying to spin it though. It's like we're going to focus on the Blue Cruise stuff that we're doing well with, sort of like GM's Super Cruise. So I think they're just going to keep it as like an assistive feature for autonomous, so not like full autonomy just quite yet.
And trimming costs because they're seeing higher supplier costs as well. And that's impacting what their operating profit even looks like from the third quarter into future quarters as well. And primarily the current quarter that we're in. Still, any update that we're seeing on where that relationship with suppliers are, especially with relations to how they're able to actually get through some of the tens of thousands of vehicles that still are lacking parts right now?
Yeah, so they said that they're going to get those 40,000 vehicles, get the parts they need and send them out before the end of the year. So that's good news. As with regards to costs, right? So they claim that they have that kind of under control, but are we going to get another warning for next quarter about, actually costs too much? So a good question for the Ford CFO coming up later today. Basically, are those costs contained? Do you actually see some costs coming down, like freight, right? Is that actually changing? I'm curious to hear about that. But you're right, Brad. I mean, are we going to see sort of like changes that are going to follow through going forward? Because it seems like GM, they're not talking about that.
Right.
All right. Thanks so much, Pras. A lot to dig through here. And we're going to be speaking to the Ford CFO a little bit later in the show. So we will, and you'll be back with us as well. So we can talk about all of that. John Lawler, Ford CFO, joining us in the 10 a.m. hour.